Hey, good afternoon to you. 406 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Jeremy Carl joins us at 4:30 from the Claremont Institute. He's got a new book, The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. He'll give us an update on that, give us a sense of the book itself. Already starting off to be a success. And Daniel Turner is here. We'll talk energy with him at 5 o'clock. The left is now claiming that Donald Trump has a secret pact with the energy companies to make them more successful, which would be good for America. How horrifying. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. If you were listening at all to the Dan Bongino program, especially in the final minutes leading up to this show, you would have heard Dan very concerned about the state of the United States Secret Service right now, specifically the leadership of the United States Secret Service. There are a growing number of scandals, and among the people who's been reporting on them so well is my next guest. Susan Crabtree is here. She is a Real Clear Politics White House and national political correspondent, and she joins us on the phone. Susan, good to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me again.
So I just want to remind people of what's been happening just recently. You and I talked about this, which is that Kamala Harris has, of course, Secret Service protection, and there was some chaos at Andrews Air Force Base recently ahead of Kamala's departure there. And that appears to be kind of the fuse that's lit all of the developments since then. Give us a brief rundown of what happened at Andrews and what has happened since.
Yes, it's sort of that event was unheard of before. I've been covering the Secret Service for more than a decade and all of their problems. And that incident occurred when a female special agent kind of snapped, and we don't know exactly why, but she got physical with her superior. She grabbed a phone from one of her bosses, took it out, started deleting apps. Then all of a sudden she was mumbling to herself behind curtains. Mm-hmm. There was actually, she threw some menstrual pads at an agent. It was described as a mental breakdown to me by several sources in the Secret Service community. Since then, the Secret Service did confirm that did in fact occur, but not all the details, called it a medical incident, and that she was, they wouldn't tell me if she's on medical leave or if she's on administrative leave, which usually occurs when there's an investigation into misbehavior among Secret Service agents and officials. Right. So since that happened 2 weeks ago, I reported on that. We reported her name. Michelle Herzig is the agent that did have that seemingly mental lapse. And since then, I've been hearing all kinds of things about it. And there was a petition that is circulating among the Secret Service community. So far, last count, I just looked on it before we went on air. There's 122 signatures, and it's not known whether those are former agents, current agents, anonymous signers. I don't know. But they are very concerned, and they want an investigation, a House oversight investigation into DEI, diversity and inclusion issues at the Secret Service. They believe that this particular agent and others have been hired even though they did not meet the complete training and physical requirements that usually the Secret Service in the past has mandated.
And the idea being that that it's their identity that was more important than their competency or their merit for the role. And so people are concerned that might be the priority rather than bringing in people who can successfully protect the people that they're tasked with protecting, right?
That's exactly right. The petition is replete with different allegations in it that I have not confirmed, so that I have not provided the petition itself until I can confirm everything in it. But the issues that it raises are exactly that. And one accusation that I believe is true, and I have talked to several sources, and Dan Bongino also believes it's true. He said it on the prior program, that Kimberly Cheadle, who is the director of the Secret Service, was the what they call a special agent in charge of the training. It's the big training center the Secret Service uses to qualify candidates, and that she was the head of the training center when this Michelle Herzig went through. And there were, from what I understand, talking to several sources in the community, there were problems with her, complaints about her mental stability even back then. And that would have been around 2017, 2018.
And so since then, Kimberly Cheadle has now, of course, become the Secret Service director. And the petition that you're talking about is additionally calling for her removal, correct?
That's right. They want her removal and at least a House Oversight Committee investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And as you remember, Jason Chaffetz led several of those investigations when he was head of the House Oversight Committee back in the mid-2015, right around then. And there was all this change that was supposed to occur with the culture there. There was this, sort of crony culture that some people would get ahead if they weren't qualified, and other people wouldn't. Now it's even more pronounced. We cannot have agents that are a harm to other agents, and even maybe the president himself, if in those positions, and especially if they were rushed through. That's what I'm not saying that happened. That's what these agents want to know, that they were demanding a congressional investigation into those allegations.
The Secret Service tries to be kind of the low-profile agency that just gets about the business of protecting the president and all of the other protectees. But it is the case, as you know, Susan, that these scandals pop up from time to time, whether we go back to the prostitution scandal back in 2012 or the guy who climbed the White House fence and then literally ran inside of the White House and was running around inside the building for some untold period of time before somebody finally realized, hey, there's a random person inside the White House. So we get these things, and then typically what happens after that is some sort of reckoning. We're like, okay, we need to figure out a way to clamp down on all of this. Do you get the sense that that's happening right now, that the Secret Service is taking seriously the problems within their ranks and the concerns even among active agents?
Well, I don't know if it's directed at the director herself, and that's where it seems to be right now, that she has signed on to what is called the 30 by 30 pledge. She wants to have, it's for all law enforcement across the country, to have 30% women in the ranks of the Secret Service by 2030. And if you look at their website, it says one of the reasons why women should be 30%, at least 30%, is that they have fewer arrests. They also have they're involved in fewer complaints. They better handle sexual issues, sexual assault issues, and allegations and crimes. But if one of the reasons why they have fewer arrests, that doesn't seem to comport with the concerns we have about rising crime in the nation. Certainly, it's just arbitrary because we have no idea if that's a good thing or if that's a bad thing.
It's catastrophically stupid, though. Like the idea, like 30, you know what we need? We need to make sure 30% of all the Secret Service agents are women. No, you need to make sure that 100% of the Secret Service agents can protect the people they're assigned to protect.
Yeah, you would want that to be your first priority, especially when it comes to protecting the president, the leader of the free world.
It's really crazy. Okay, so where do you think this goes? Do you get the sense that Congress is taking seriously these issues and will be launching full-scale investigations into them?
Well, it's interesting that just a few days ago, when this petition started circulating, you had the House Judiciary Committee Republicans launching an investigation into DEI problems with the FBI.
Yes.
And we know from other reporting there's DEI concerns about training, whether the people are being trained enough, qualified enough to serve in the diplomatic security service. We've seen lots of reports about that. I contacted the Oversight Committee. They are not yet ready to make a statement about this one way or another. I know they have their hands full with lots of investigations, but they are probably concerned about the fact that we still don't know about the cocaine that appeared in the White House. And there's obviously a fingerprint trail, and we should know by now whose that was.
Yeah,
So,
I got the impression, by the way, and I don't know if your reporting bears this out, but I keep referring to Dan because as I was coming into my program and listening to Dan's broadcast, and Dan Bongino was making it really clear that they know whose cocaine that was, and that's the implication that I was getting from Dan, and that this has basically just been a huge cover-up, and the Secret Service has been playing along with it. Do you think that's right?
well, there has to be fingerprints on a baggie. I do know, covering the Secret Service, that there is a cronyism that it's been a problem for years and years and years. And you get ahead, and the people who get punished is very uneven who ends up getting punished because it's who you know in the Secret Service and what that person has on you. Huh. And that's why we saw all of these stories come out, because there were lots of people getting punished, but other people weren't for the same type of infractions. And so when that type of environment happens, you're going to have whistleblowers. You had whistleblowers in the FBI to come out and talk about their very, very long DEI charges, complaints about what's going on in that agency. Now you have a petition. And this petition, I've seen it. I'm not posting it because there are things that I have to confirm in that petition before posting it. But it's very long and it's very detailed about some of the problems and the uneven punishment that's taking place and the uneven qualification.
Yes. In other words, they're alleging even more problems than the public is even aware of right now. And you're just working to verify what you can.
Yes. I have verified that Kimberly Cheadle was in charge of the training center in 2016. It's on her bio. It's easily verifiable. And also there's a picture of her from 2017 that says she was still the special agent in charge of the training center. So what we need to know is, and I know Dan says he knows, but I need to know myself, whether she was the one that, whether she ignored complaints that this woman was unstable and other complaints about other people not being qualified, or, how she ran that training center. We need to know. Because if people are getting through that are unqualified or are even less qualified than other people, just for DEI purposes, why do we want, certainly someone who has a mental stability issue, that should be a huge red flag, and they should not be serving on the vice president's detail.
And we live in a country right now where the temperature is turned way up, that it feels like at any moment things can explode. And the last thing we need is any harm to come to the people the Secret Service is supposed to be protecting well. So, I mean, this is about as critical as it gets. And Susan Crabtree, I'm so grateful for your time as always, and that you're digging into this important issue. Thank you very much. And gotta love Phil from Fredericksburg. He's on line 1. Phil, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, look, Vince, can I vote for Donald Trump now? Can we put Donald Trump in now, please? Because I'm tired of this Biden administration. Everything they touch turns the world into a Looney Tunes cartoon. We got I see dead people in the White House. We got I see dead people at the Secret Service. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just turning into a real-life cartoon version of, I don't know what kind of bizarre reality this is.
Remember Stormy Daniels even earlier this week in her testimony in New York was telling us that she sees dead people, Phil. She was revealing her paranormal business during the course of that disastrous testimony for the left, which is why James Carville is screeching today. I don't know why we're going to lose. I released a podcast and I said you should vote for Biden and nobody's listening to me. Things are not going well for the left, but the end of the Biden administration can't come soon enough, can it, Phil?
Come on, Donald Trump, man. We need you, brother, please.
He's working on it, man. He's working on it. You too, Phil. Yeah, Trump is definitely working on it. Love hearing from Phil. So actually, speaking of Trump, he did step outside of that courtroom today. And, Michael Cohen is supposed to testify Monday. I'll try and get to more of this later on in the program, but the Trump's team was like, hey, can you put a gag on Michael Cohen? If you're going to gag Trump, at least gag Cohen. Cohen's out of control. The judge was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. He said, prosecution, hey, prosecutors, tell Michael Cohen he probably shouldn't say so much in public, but I'm not going to put a gag order on him. So Trump steps out right after today's proceedings and had this to say.
There is no gag order to Michael Cohen. What the judge did was amazing, actually. It was amazing. Everybody can say whatever they want. They can say whatever they want.
I do wonder if the judge is going to slap Trump with violating the gag order for mentioning Michael Cohen in that statement.
But I'm not allowed to say anything about anybody. It's a disgrace. And you see it. The media sees it. And it's really very sad. If you look at the legal experts and the legal scholars, every one of them say this trial is a scam. It's something should have never happened. By the way, it could have happened 7 years ago. They bring it right during the election.
Yep.
Nobody sees it. Nobody talks about it.
That's the timing thing. Yeah, it's obviously election interference, the timing of all of this. What's Michael Cohen up to these days?
Midas Mighty. So it's Midas Touch Network. Mm-hmm. And you'll see Mea Culpa podcast merchandise. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, perfect. I didn't write it down yesterday, and I thought I'll remember it. I didn't. All right, I got it written down, and now I can get it.
There you go.
There you go. Michael Cohen selling T-shirts, giving out the website, telling people where to get the T-shirts. He's very excited to testify in this trial because he wants to, just like the rest of the left, hurt Donald Trump. I want to hurt him. It'll be interesting to see what happens next week. I think Trump's team should let Michael Cohen be as crazy as he wants to be on the stand. They shouldn't try and control this guy at all. Prove to the jury what a nut he is. And maybe, just maybe, at least one of those jurors will be like, hey, that guy's kind of a nut. We'll see. A lot of debate on whether or not Trump should testify, too. Trump had earlier said, remember, he was asked a couple weeks ago about this. He goes, I'd love to. Why wouldn't I? I just tell the truth. It's easy. I'll just tell the truth. But you might not need to. It sounds like things are going well for Trump in that courtroom, right? If your team is 7 touchdowns ahead, do you put your star quarterback in? You might not need to. Keep his arm rested. Coming up, we're going to talk to Jeremy Carl about his new book. It's The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. We're seeing a lot of it all over the place. Jeremy will explain. That's ahead. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Daniel Turner talks American energy with us because that's his expertise, and that'll be at 5 o'clock as the media says it's a scandal that Donald Trump would like to drill for more oil. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yes, one of the many things that normal stuff is now scandalous. You know, it wasn't that long ago that American conservatives would scoff at the idea that our country was afflicted with systemic racism all over the place. That's what the left kept saying. But in the process of scoffing, many of us missed that there was actually some systemic racism going on. In fact, the left has worked to infuse it all over the place, including in corporate America, higher education, and the United States government. Here with a perspective on how is my next guest. Jeremy Carl joins us. He's a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute. He's got a new book on the subject called The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. Jeremy, good to have you with us, sir. Thank you very much, and congrats on the new book.
Thanks so much, Vince. It's a pleasure to be on.
It is one of the kind of the ironies of this conversation that for so many years the right was like, systemic racism, will you please? We have real problems to get to. Will you stop lying to us? But it turns out we definitely have some, don't we?
Absolutely, and that's what I tried to document in my book in almost 1,000 references over 13 chapters. You see it everywhere from the military to healthcare to entertainment to crime and everything. And it's just, it was kind of hiding in plain sight. Yeah. And I just was trying to get that discussion going so that we could have a little bit more of a real talk rather than the talk the left would like us to have. Right. The left dresses it up in euphemisms, but what they've done, especially over the last decade, is they've really accelerated normalizing racial prejudice, haven't they? No, absolutely. And I mean, it's sort of shocking the degree to which this sort of stuff is just out there. And in fact, you have folks like America First Legal, Stephen Miller's outfit, just kind of suing right now, finally, just blatant racial discrimination in job hiring where they're like, well, you can only get this job if you're black or if you're foreign born or whatever, and that's not legal. But we've been so kind of beaten down that we haven't even been challenging it until recently.
Your book, as I understand it, sets out to kind of just compile a lot of this to show people what actually is happening in their country, because sometimes it's hard to see, or you might think that this is a one-off, but in your book, you cover how actually this is pervasive.
Absolutely. And I mean, I didn't try to write just sort of an angry polemic or just something that was going to get people riled up. I mean, it's a very even-handed book. I've been endorsed by scholars like Victor Davis Hanson and Eric Kaufman, and then sort of more popular media folks like Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk, and then the longest-serving member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. So I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming, and all it just took is for somebody to really compile it and sort of explain it and put it in a form that's kind of digestible to an ordinary person. And that's really what I've tried to do.
A lot of these institutions have tried to convince themselves that they're not engaged in racial prejudice, right? Like the idea is like, no, they dress up, like, for instance, the phrase anti-racism on first blush seems like the kind of thing that people would embrace. Of course, like, we're all opposed to racism. I would sign up for anti-racism, but that doesn't actually mean what it pretends to mean, does it?
No, absolutely not. And that's what you really see with critical race theory. You see it with Ibram Kendi and people like this who kind of say that any disparity in any outcome by race is automatically evidence of racism. And so, with that type of kind of definition of anti-racism going on, there's really no way that a white person can win under that scenario. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what you see is this conversation that is not really kind of connected to reality at all, but is really just kind of discussing the various ways in which white people have to be at fault for anything that the left sees in society that they don't like.
What kind of damage has this thinking and this pervasive systemic racism done to the country?
Well, I think it's done a lot. And I didn't just write this book for white people. That was something I kind of make very clear up front, because what's happening right now is, particularly when you talk to a lot of younger people, I was having this conversation with Charlie Kirk, and he was saying, when I talk about this with older people, they kind of are like, oh, I don't think we should even talk about this. It might be racist. But when I talk to younger white people about it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is happening in my school. It's happening when I apply for jobs. They get it. And of course, what's happening, unfortunately, then is that some of those folks, if they see that society is not really going to redress their needs, they are going to, go down potentially some dark paths that none of us want to anybody to go down. And so really the only way that we're going to get a sort of social peace in the U.S. is if we kind of go back to trying to treat everybody as much as possible by the content of their character, rather than saying, well, certain types of skin are privileged over other types of skin.
In other words, a merit-based, colorblind society in practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the ways that this is becoming. I think actually, in some sense, I think 10 years ago, your book title might not have even been possible. I think just people would be like, "You can't say that. Like a white person could be a victim of anything."
Absolutely, you're right. And in fact, it's sort of interesting that you mentioned that, because even this was the sort of more moderated title, and I insisted on putting anti-white racism in the title. My original title was "It's Okay to Be White," and I think it's interesting because that was acceptable to my editors. And then we finally went to the sales staff, and they said, I can't sell that book at Walmart and Costco. And I'm like, well, why not? I mean, it's okay to be black. It's okay to be Asian American. It's okay to be Hispanic. Why would it be problematic to say it's okay to be white? But in our anti-white environment, of course, this is seen as a great outrage.
Of course. Well, this it's so crazy. But also, one of the other pieces here is that, as you mentioned a moment ago, it's not just damage to white people that's happening in the country. One of the things that the Supreme Court hearings have revealed in college admissions and many other obvious examinations of what's going on with admissions in both elite high schools and certainly in colleges across the country is that there's broad categories of people who are being subjected to racial prejudice, including Asian Americans who are trying to get into some of these institutions and are being held back by virtue of their ancestry, their heritage, their color of their skin. That's the only reason that they're being knocked down the list.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you're seeing that, and I think one of the things that's interesting is that, but I think, and kind of indicative of where we are, is that when the Supreme Court, when the affirmative action case went before the Supreme Court this year, and the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions, they went with Asian plaintiffs or Asian American plaintiffs to convince an all-white conservative wing of the Supreme Court to kind of strike this down. And that's because I think even among the attorneys, who I think were very savvy, they said, I think that conservative justices even will be uncomfortable in doing a ruling that might look like it's going to benefit white people in some way. So we're going to have Asian plaintiffs who, absolutely, let's be clear, they were being discriminated against. But even that kind of showed the discomfort level that people had in saying that white people might be kind of being discriminated against in some fashion.
Yes. No, you're right. There's a kind of a reflexive discomfort around that, because psychologically, I think a lot of white people are, feel conditioned to not bring up when they feel like they've been slighted on account of that.
Right.
It's interesting. When I was a kid, I lived in Hawaii, and one of the features of growing up in Hawaii, I did for just 3 years. I lived there, and one of the features there is that very few people talk about is pretty pronounced anti-white racism, actually, among people who are there, and in fact they're big on calling white people haoles, which is another way of saying foreigners. And it was a weird phenomenon for me, because I was like, well, that's bizarre. But even ever since then, I think this is actually the first time I've even mentioned it on radio. It's like, I'm not going to bring it up as like some effort that, they were really out to get me because of my skin color. I think that it's not worth actually dwelling on that for the most part. But if it's distorting your entire system to the point that it's harming people, that is racial prejudice, it probably is worth mentioning.
No, that's exactly right. And in fact, I think the biggest thing I actually felt like I wanted to be conscious of in writing this book is I'm not trying to create a new victim class, and I'm not trying to whine to the refs. I'm actually trying to rally the troops. I'm trying to say, white people, we shouldn't be putting up with second-class treatment. And there's nothing shameful about asserting your equal rights. It doesn't mean that you're horrible and that your life is worthless just because somebody is discriminating against you. You should have the self-respect to stand up and say, we are not going to take that type of discrimination against us. So, and frankly, if white people just decided tomorrow that they weren't going to put up with that as a group, I think it would largely go away. White people are not a 1% minority in this society. So, it wasn't kind of meant to like create a new victim class. It's a way of saying, hey, let's everybody stand up for equal treatment. Exactly.
So that point is the most resonant, the last one you just made, which is like, when you stand up in that way, what you're doing is you're saying racial prejudice of any kind is unacceptable. And you should acknowledge when it's happening to people who look like you. It's fine to do that. So in fact, like as you talk about the book title, it strikes me that language is really important here. For years, to the extent that the right has ever talked about this, or anybody has talked about issues like this, they would dress it up in the phrase reverse racism, or some sort of half step acknowledgement of what was going on here. And I always thought that was insane, because I felt like you're not properly describing what's going on. You're using euphemisms to try and conceal your concern.
Right. No, absolutely. And I even had to train myself, to be quite honest, Vince. I mean, it was like we're so conditioned that it took me several times of even talking about this where I was just comfortable in saying, hey, it's anti-white and we need to put that front and center and not just say things like critical race theory or reverse racism or wokeness or all these sort of euphemisms that we use to avoid really describing what is going on, because it makes us so uncomfortable as a society. I think if you can't describe the problem, you're not going to begin to really solve the problem.
Now, I will say, I don't think that our ruling class, or especially congressional leadership, is quite there yet in terms of being willing to just be frank about what's happening and to argue for what you and I are arguing for, which is a merit-based, colorblind society that's free of all of this.
Yeah.
Do you get the sense that they're aware of it, but they're nervous about how to discuss it?
They're not there yet. I think they are nervous about how to discuss it. It's one of the main reasons I wrote my book, because I want us to be not nervous about discussing it and to not be, there's nothing to be ashamed about in discussing this. I can tell you I'm not going to out anybody in particular, but I can tell you there are multiple members of Congress who are reading this book right now. I may actually be appearing on a podcast with a member to discuss this book in the not such distant future.
I have a guess. I'm going to write down my guess right now because I bet you I know the answer to this, but we'll see if I'm right.
Maybe. But yeah, I mean, there are folks who are willing to discuss it, but it's still not a majority. And again, my goal is just to strengthen in a way that is not histrionic, but very fact-based, that the cases of the people who want to talk about this issue in a responsible way. And then hopefully, if the people lead, the leaders will eventually follow, right? That's kind of where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. You know, one thing I think of sometimes is white working age men is a almost never discussed issue, but have been savaged by the changes in our economy and the government. You know, it's like, and as a result of the pressure not to talk about any afflictions for white people, I think basically the damage that takes place against them is often never mentioned or downplayed.
Absolutely, and there's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Angus Deaton, who with his wife Ann Case, also a prominent economist, has looked at these so-called deaths of despair among middle-aged white people. So that's everything from drug addiction to suicide and kind of similar things, or alcohol. And I get into that in the book and discuss it because, again, you're right, we're not discussing it enough.
Yeah, not enough. All right, well, Jeremy Carl, thank you for writing the book and trying to make it more obvious and normal to talk about. Again, Jeremy Carl with the Claremont Institute. The book is The Unprotected Class, How Anti-White Racism is Tearing America Apart. Jeremy, thank you so much for writing the book and for your time today. There's a really important document to Western civilization called the Magna Carta. You may be familiar with it. Signed in 1215, a declaration of the rights of free men in Britain. And this document obviously still exists to this day. And this week, there were two Biden-aged vandals attempting to smash their way through the case that contains it at the British Library in London. Reverend Dr. Sue Parfitt is apparently a priest of some kind, and Judy Bruce, 82, 85 years old. They tried to smash their way in, these whack jobs. Take a listen as they tried to. They literally had a hammer and a chisel as they call themselves Just Stop Oil. This is a lefty group that wants humans to suffer.
Yes, sir. Can you come to do all that I can.
Can you stop doing that, please? Stop filming, please, eh?
To
Can you stop doing that?
alleviate the appalling suffering
How polite. Can you stop doing that, please? Can you stop smashing your way through the case?
that's
come to
coming
my
down
Calcutta,
the
over,
line
please.
and is here already.
Can you stop doing
Whatever
that,
it
please?
takes,
Can
whatever
you
the
stop filming,
cost.
please? Can you stop doing that?
So we must
Stop doing that, please. Did you hear me?
just
Oh my gosh, it's like a Biden speech. It's taking forever. Just get it out, woman. She's trying to smash her way through to the Magna Carta. According to Euronews, they broke the glass around it. They tried to chisel their way through. The pair glued their hands together, holding a sign that reads, "The government is breaking the law." And they kept saying, "Is the government above the law?" The British Library said police had been notified and there was minimal damage to the case. The Magna Carta itself remains undamaged. Thank goodness it remains undamaged. But it looked like they were trying to damage it. They were trying to work their way through. It's par for the course for these lefties who are against human flourishing. They glue themselves to famous artworks and they glue themselves to streets and they disrupt commerce and transportation. They try and make people's lives as miserable as possible, including by destroying documents that declare human liberties, human rights, like the Magna Carta. Coming up, we'll be joined by Daniel Turner to talk energy with him. He knows all about it. The left is now claiming that Trump is at the center of a big energy scandal. He met with the oil executives and said they really should be supporting him for president. So, of course, that's a scandal. I'll share all of it with you in just a moment. It's 4:58.